Hello and welcome to the basics of metal casting. Today we are going to see the basics in the metal casting and introduction to the foundry technology. To begin with the foundry technology, we have to first see what do you mean by manufacturing processes. The engineering definition of the manufacturing process is as such, it is the process of converting the raw materials into finished goods. And in order to convert the raw material into finished goods, we require a number of processes and operations to be carried away on the same. Hence, technically, the manufacturing process can be termed as it is a process in which the metal is first been shaped, then it is been machined, and finally joined them to produce the different components, parts, assemblies, etc. The term manufacturing process can be broadly classified into five main categories, namely casting process, metal forming process, machining process, joining process, and finally the surface finishing process. Now we'll go one by one and see in detail what each process means. Starting with the first process, it is known as the casting process. It is the process in which the metal is being poured in a refractory mold which has been made of a sand, which is having the impression of the required cavity. The metal is been poured into the same, it is allowed to cool so that it will solidify, and finally the mold is been either broken or it is been opened, and the final part which is been coming out or ejected from the same is known as the casting. There are different types of the casting process, out of which the first most oldest type of the process known as the sand casting process. In sand casting process, the molds are being made from the sand. It is also known as the breakable casting process because the mold is been broken here. The second types of the process is the shell molding process, in which the mold which is been prepared is made from a shell. Then the plastic molding process, in which the plaster molds are being used. Then the special casting process, we will see the investment casting process, in which the molds are being made from the wax. Then the permanent die casting process, which has been categorized in the hot chamber die casting and cold chamber die casting, centrifugal casting process, squeeze casting process, etc. The second type of the manufacturing process is the forming process. It is the process in which the metal is being formed to the required shape by plastically deforming the same. The different types of the forming process are as such: rolling process. It is the process in which the metal is been reduced in its cross sectional by making it to pass between the two hardened steel rolls which are been rotating in the opposite direction. Next one is the forging process. Forging process is one of the oldest type of the metalworking process, having its origin from the primitive blacksmith. The process is so widely used such that the 80% of the automobile parts are being manufactured by the forging process itself. The process can be defined as the process in which the metal is being given the required shape by either hammering or pressing. The next type of the forming process is the drawing process, which is most widely used for manufacturing of the wires, tubes, etc. Next comes the extrusion process. It is the process in which the metal is being loaded in a container. The container is being closed from one of its side by a die which is having the necessary opening, whereas at its other side it is having a plunger or a ram. A dummy block is been placed in between the plunger as well as the metal in order to protect the plunger from the adverse effect of the heat. When the plunger or ram applies the pressure, the metal gets compressed in between the walls of the plunger, the walls of the cylinder, and the walls of the die, and it is allowed to move through a single opening so that it can take its similar shape. The next type of the manufacturing process which we are going to see is known as the machining process. It is the process in which the desired or the required shape to the metal is being given by removal of the metal in the forms of a chip by either using a single point cutting tool or a multi-point cutting tool. The different types of the machining operations are as such: facing, turning, milling, boring, tapping, drilling, rimming, etc. It is one of the most widely used manufacturing process in the industries. The next type of the process which we are going to see is the joining process. It is a process in which two similar or dissimilar metals are being joined to each another. The different types of the joining process are welding, brazing, soldering, pressing, adhesive bonding, riveting, nut bolting, etc. The last type of the manufacturing process is the surface finishing process. These processes are mostly adopted on the metal at the end of the manufacturing process in order to increase their appearance and aesthetic. The different types of the surface finishing process are grinding, polishing, honing, lapping, buffing, burnishing, etc. In this slide, we have seen the categorization of the manufacturing process. Now, we'll see the introduction to the foundry. The foundry engineering deals with the process of making the casting in a mold prepared by the pattern. The different stages of manufacturing the casting are as such: pattern making, mold and core making, melting and casting, then fettling, and the last one is this testing and inspection, followed by painting, heat treatment and dispatch. To broadly classify the foundry, we have to first see what are the definitions of the foundry. The foundry may be defined as the commercial setup for manufacturing casting, or it can also be defined as the collection of the material, fuel, flux and tools to produce the casting. The simplest type but the non-technical definition is that it is the place where the castings are being manufactured. The castings are being manufactured on the small scale, medium scale as well as the mass scale. These are the few examples of the casting of cylinder blocks. There are different types of the cylinder blocks as such: the 4-cylinder block, 3-cylinder block, 6-cylinder blocks, etc., which are mostly used in the tractors. See, as we have discussed earlier, that the metal casting is a versatile process. The casting which weights in grams to the castings which weights in tons can be manufactured by this process. This is the one of the example of the engine or the biggest engine in the world which can be casted. Now we'll see few of the advantage of metal casting, advantages as well as the disadvantage of the metal casting as compared to the other manufacturing process. The first advantage is that the casting is one of the most versatile process. It is the process, only one process in which the metal is being used in the liquid form, whereas as compared to the other process, the metal is being present in the solid or semi-solid form. Different shapes, parts, different weight castings can be manufactured by the casting process. Casting provides the greatest freedom of design in terms of the shape, size and product quality. Casting produces the machinable parts. The parts which are being casted can easily be machined. Shapes which are difficult and uneconomical to be obtained by otherwise manufacturing process can be easily achieved by using the casting process. A product may be casted as a single piece, thereby eliminating the need of metal joining processes. Very heavy and bulky parts can also be easily casted. Metal difficult to be shaped by other manufacturing process can easily be casted by the casting process. These were the few advantages of the metal casting process. Now we'll see the limitations of the casting process. Generally, parts manufactured by the sand casting are having a poor surface finish, because always it is seen that few sand is been embedded to the final casting, which is required to be further removed by either grinding or surface finishing processes. The second limitation is the poor dimensional accuracy as compared to the machining. The process is labor intensive, because even if a single casting is required to be manufactured, we require the different setups. The setup as such as the pattern making, mold making, core making, melting, fettling, inspection, testing, etc. Climatic condition may affect the quality of the casting. Heavy investment is being required. As the process consists of handling of the molten metal, the safety always matter first in case of the metal casting process. Now we'll see the classification of the foundries based on different criteria. The foundries are mostly classified into two main categories. The first one according to the production process and the second one according to the metal used. We'll see one by one what they mean. First we'll see the foundries which are being classified according to the production process. According to the production process, the foundries are being classified into four main terms: captive foundries, jobbing foundries, production foundries and semi-production foundries. Whereas according to the metal use, they are been classified into two main terms: ferrous foundries as well as the non-ferrous foundries. First, we'll see what do you mean by a captive foundry. The captive foundries are the integral part of most of the manufacturing organization which produce the casting for their same use. Suppose if a XYZ company is engaged in the manufacturing of the four-wheelers. Hence, the cylinder blocks, cylinder heads which are being required in the four-wheelers are being manufactured by the same company or the same foundry. Such type of the foundries are known as the captive foundries. The second type of the foundry is the jobbing foundry. Such types of the foundry receives the order from other big foundries and manufactures the casting from them. They are not having their own product, but they receive the orders from other big foundries and manufacture the casting for them. The next type is the production foundries. The production foundries is nothing but the addition of the captive foundries as well as the jobbing foundries. Whereas the last one is the semi-production foundries. These are the highly mechanized foundries. So this is the flow chart of the foundry or the sand casting process. The sand casting process starts with the preparation of the patterns for the required component. The pattern is nothing but the replica of the object which is required to be casted, except the different types of the allowances are being added to that of the pattern. The pattern resemblance to that of the size as well as the shape of the casting. It is slightly oversized than that of the actual casting because of the presence of the allowances. Otherwise, it is nothing but the replica of the part which is required to be casted. The patterns can be made from the different materials. It can be made from the wood, it can be made from the metal, it can be made from the plaster of Paris, plastic, thermocol as well as the wax. After pattern preparation, the next step is the sand preparation. The sand is been mixed with the different types of the additives with the bentonite powder and water, and the dump sand mixture is been prepared to manufacture the molds. The next step is to create the cavity or the impression of the pattern inside the sand. The cavity in the sand mold is found by packing a sand around the pattern, then separating the mold into two hulls and removing the pattern. The two hulls are namely known as the cope as well as the drag. The cope is the top part of the molding box, whereas the drag is the lower part of the molding box. The two different impressions of the patterns are being formed into the cope as well as the drag part. And finally, these cope and drag parts are being assembled together to form a full cavity. The mold must also contain the gating system as well as the rising system. The gating system is nothing but the passageway through which the molten metal will enter the mold cavity. If the casting is to have identical surfaces, a core must be included in the mold. A new sand mold must be made for each part produced. Now, once the mold is ready for pouring, the metal is been melted in a furnace, and the same is been traveled through the ladles from the furnace into the mold. The molten metal is then poured into the mold cavity. After pouring the molten metal into the mold cavity, it is allowed to cool so that it will solidify. After solidification of the casting, the same mold box is been placed upon the vibratory platform, which is also known as the shakeout unit, where the sand which has been sticking to that of the casting surface disintegrates and falls down, and only casting remains on the vibratory platform. Now the next process is to remove the unwanted parts, which is nothing but the gating system from that of the casting, and this process is accomplished in a fettling section. The fettling section removes the runner, riser, gating and unwanted parts from that of the casting, and finally been finished by using a grinding operation. The next step is to the clean and inspect the casting. The different types of the destructive and non-destructive tests are being used for testing and inspection of the casting. Then if the heat treatment is been required as per the casting, it varies, and finally the casting is been painted and shipping and dispatched. Thank you.